Guys, I'm going to tell you about my spiritual journey today, which started in 2019. It started when I stopped going to church. And how did I stop going to church? Because since grade school, early grade school, I was going to church consistently. So I grew up in a family where going to church was kind of an unspoken rule because if you didn't go to church, you were shamed, really shamed. So we just knew we go to church to avoid trouble because we didn't really like the crowds, but we had to. Um, so since grade school, no one noticed me in church. But really, I was basically invisible. I was invisible. And then after high school, I got to law school, and suddenly people started noticing me. Oh my god, people started noticing me, and during my final years in law school, I started getting nominated for positions in church, leadership positions, which I enjoyed. I must be honest, I enjoyed it at first. And then being a law student, I started questioning things that were happening in church. For example, one day, people are preaching about, the pastor is preaching about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, how they were brave, how they were faithful, how they were willing to burn for Christ. And then the preacher was like, how many of you, if Boko Haram came, would be willing to die for Christ? And obviously, when you're in church, you're meant to accept that, oh, we wouldn't have died for Christ. It's unspoken, but it's true. Oh, we wouldn't have died for Christ. Oh, we're sinners, this and that. So everybody was quiet to show that none of us would have, right? So I raised my hand. For a minute, it was ignored because it's like maybe I was saying I would have died for Christ. But then the preacher realized that I wasn't saying that. I actually wanted to ask a question, which is also another thing you don't get to do in church. It's unspoken, but it's true. So I asked if I agree that I'm Islamic. I agree that I'm Islamic, but God knows that I'm really for Him. Truly, He doesn't expect me to die just so I prove a point. I can leave, but then He knows that I didn't mean it, that I was Islamic. Assuming that being Islamic is wrong, according to, Now, when I asked that question, everybody was like, oh, yeah. That wasn't the worst part. The preacher was like, forgive them, these are law students. That's not the worst part. What then happened is my question wasn't answered. They continued with the preaching, the sermon. And after church, everybody was looking at me like something was wrong with me. So that's the first time that I knew that I probably don't belong here because I like asking questions. So I even met the pastor after church. You greet each other and stuff. But he didn't address my question, not even in private. So that was the first thing that showed me that, yeah, nah. And then there was this thing that I started noticing of how people change even the way they walk in church. They're getting a bit bent down to show humility when they're walking in church. Basically acting. It was basically everything was not real. That's what I noticed. Everyone is trying to be on their best behavior, not for God, but for the people that are around, for the pastors, the elders, the people you want to please. So I figured, nah, this is not me. And then I was being questioned about how I dressed. I would wear my sweatpants and a top, my tracksuits, and they were like, for a person who is a lawyer, this was the pastor. For a person who's a lawyer, you're not supposed to dress like that at church. You're supposed to dress your best. I didn't understand why I couldn't be comfortable. I couldn't be in comfortable clothes at church. That was the other thing. And then the last two things that made me really say, okay, I'm done with this. First of all, I graduate, and then I'm told, oh, we've been praying for you. We've been praying for you to pass, Chichi. And then after that, it took me like a month or two before I got my first job. And I'm like, oh, we've been praying so hard for you. We've been praying and fasting day and night so that you get employed. And I was like, okay. That was the other thing. Like, if you prayed for me, okay, keep it to yourself. You don't have to tell me, especially after I get a job, especially after I graduate. You could have told me, you could have involved me in your prayers way before I got this job. Oh, I was really getting referenced in church, like, that time when somebody's preaching and they said, I'm like, for example, Rutendo. I was being chosen to be an example in so many instances, which was uncommon because remember I said I was invisible before. And then what happened then is I had a cousin of mine that attended church with me. Um, she had a dream about me, but she didn't tell me, and then she told the pastor, and then the pastor told me that dream as if it was his dream. He was like, Sister Tendo, Sister Tendo, how strong is your prayer life? And I was like, it's okay. Um, Apparently, he was insinuating that I party a lot, which he wouldn't have known if he hadn't been told by my cousin. It's like, Tarota Mafa, we dreamt that you had died because of the way that you live. Guys, that was the last stroke. I was like, okay, I've had it up to here. So I figured, whoa, I left out a part. My cousin then told me way after that I dreamt about you. That I dreamt about you. You were on a stretcher bed, critical because of partying life. And then that's when I put two and two together, that the pastor pretending that my cousin's dream was his dream. Why would somebody do that? I don't know. But it really discouraged me a lot. And one day, 2019, 31 December, during the all-night prayer, the one that they do before we get into New Year, I decided this is the last time I'm coming here. I want God to show himself to me, herself to me, because I really can't do this anymore. I was really now seeing everything together for the last time. Everything was just so clear, the pretense, it was overwhelming. So I said, this is it. And that's how I stopped going to church. That's part one of my spiritual journey. I've gone to church 1, 2, 3 times afterwards. Sometimes you've visited and people ask you to go to church. Sometimes you're like, let me just go because somebody tries to convince you, oh, my church is different. So I've gone to church 3 more times afterwards, and I just realized I was right. That's part one of my spiritual journey. I'm going to tell you part two. Part two is crazy. Part two is dramatic. So I'm going to bring it. But this is it for now, guys. Bye.